Yeah. Hey everyone. Hi, cool. So thank you so much for coming on to the event. So this event has been organised by the Oxford Hub, as well as Transition by Design. Both organisations based in this building. So I'm from the Oxford Hub. I'm on the student committee. We work with students and the local community, trying to get students involved with social action through volunteering projects, skill placements, and social enterprise and that kind of thing, and also events like this one, and Transition by Design do a lot of work. Would you mind, you could say something briefly, Katie?
We are an architect practice, and we work on projects that look at social change in the local community. We've got a couple of projects on, as well as standard architectural practice, we've got a couple of projects on working with people affected by homelessness, and projects, things like that. And one of the things that we are looking at is community-led housing, which is kind of why we put on this event. Cooperatives are a form of community-led housing, and we are working on a Oxford City Council funded project that's looking at the need for community-led housing in Oxford at the moment, to understand that need and what we can do to kind of get that going. And that's going to be published as a research project in October. So all these events that we're putting on are feeding into this live project, which we're excited about.
Awesome. Cool. Yeah. So basically, we put on this event to talk about student housing and the current situation in student housing, as well as how we can move on to kind of perhaps explore different models of student housing. Particularly with an emphasis on Oxford. So in Oxford there are over 30,000 students living and studying in the city at the University of Oxford and Oxford Brookes. Oxford is one of the most expensive places to live in the UK, and the cost of living often matches that of London, but wages and student loans are obviously not equivalent to London ones, so that makes it a very difficult place to afford to live. Tonight we're going to be exploring some alternative solutions to student housing that might be more affordable and have a whole range of other benefits. To start off, we'll be hearing from Chris from the Birmingham Student Housing Co-op, which is an existing student housing cooperative. So it'll be really cool to hear about their experiences of setting up a housing co-op and how that's working currently. Without any further ado, let's hear from Chris. Brilliant.
Okay, so hello everyone. I'm Chris. I'm actually now an ex-member of Birmingham Student Housing Co-op. I lived there for 2.5 years during my time at the University of Birmingham. And I'm just here today to tell you a little bit about how we set up, or how you can set up a student housing co-op. A little bit about can live and do whatever you wish to do in the house, and you have that autonomy. There might be needs that you have for the people that are living there, so you might need additional access to the house, which isn't very common, especially in a privately owned student house in the UK. There's the least, very small amount of those are suitable for wheelchair users, for instance. There's and we discuss problems of the house. So if there's maintenance problems, if there's other decisions we need to make in a formal way. Good value for money. So at the moment, so the members of Student Co-operative Housing, so Edinburgh, Sheffield, and Birmingham, they're able to provide up to 30% lower rent than the equivalent housing or halls in their vicinity. For instance, at Birmingham, I know it's about 10% as well. So 10% lower for a house that is on the higher end of the scale, really. It's like 9 bedrooms. So you can go to the next slide as well. Just finish with that. And also, so another important thing about co-ops before we move on to the next slide is the idea that we're not trying to pocket the money. We're not trying to raise as much, like a private landlord would, to be able to essentially in some ways exploit other people use just overcharging, but that's part of what why we can have it so cheap. We well, actually you'd think it goes against actually being cheap and then also not making profit, but actually we don't have to make profit for ourselves, but we invest that back into the house to make it better. Okay, so stop there. Okay, so there's many ways you can set up a co-op. There's a certain number of steps that are definitely mandatory, such as registering, raising some money, getting a group together that wants to do it in the first place and having a vision, which I'll probably repeat actually in a minute. But this is my take on it. And I tried to make it as memorable as possible. So try and remember these images if you're trying to remember how to make a housing co-op. So first, you need to all be in the same bowl. You need a group of students or a group of people that shares the same general idea of what they want. And once you've got that group together, you need to then you've got these quite a lot of ideas and a lot of wishes that you all want to do, but you need to, for the purpose of a student house co-op, you need to have a vision and a purpose that you all unite under. And then after that comes some work, some hard work sometimes. It's documentation. So looking at creating a business plan that's viable and that would attract investment, as well as to be able to have just a quick serious look at what it would take financially, and to define yourselves really and put it down in paper. But then also to start working groups from the group with your vision, to be able to look at how to firstly, especially with a problem again, especially with student housing co-ops. Transferring knowledge should be one of the very first things you do. When you start working groups, every single working group should say, how are we going to record, transfer, and generally dissipate this information once we've learnt it, and so that it doesn't dissolve into what's happened many times since over the last 2 or 3 decades in the UK, and why student housing co-ops haven't been successful before now, because they always the group of people that were inspired and they had a vision graduated, or they couldn't find the funding, or one reason or another. But if you had all that written down, it can be picked up very quickly by a new group of freshers. Cool. And then after you've done that, you need to incorporate as a company. So you will have to pay a bit. It's I think between £200 and £800 generally, depending on a few things. But you do need to raise a little bit of money, so then you can incorporate as an entity, which will help your business case when you're looking for investment. Cheers, Johnny. Cool. And then after you've registered as a co-op, you need then to do two things in quick succession. And this is actually where the National Body Student Co-op Housing comes in, and where this is where it gets quite difficult for students to start thinking, how are we going to raise like tens of thousands of pounds of money or more to get a house, like let alone like a halls or something like more high in cost or higher in cost. So this step is really looking at trying to gain money, but also looking at properties, essentially property acquisition, but also fundraising, really. And as a co-op, typically you'd look to ethical investors such as other co-ops, primarily also looking at a splitting investment from other more established co-ops. For instance, like with Birmingham Student Housing Co-op, the arrangement was so throughout 2012, I think 2011 to 2012, we had groups. So the group being set up, having a common vision, starting to write the documentation and get a business plan, talking to people, going to conferences and the like, getting to the point where they incorporated. But then we were like, well, where's how are we going to get this house? How are we going to get this money? And that's where, so what has happened previously is that we approached the phone co-op, for instance. So the phone co-op, really big established co-op, been around for decades, had a social development fund that they're willing to spend on social or community projects like this. And so they put down for the mortgage. They bought the freehold, essentially, or via the mortgage, and they then made a lease contract, so equivalent to like a landlord contract with the group of students in Birmingham. But now with Birmingham Student Cooperative Homes, instead of that, because that was something that hasn't, again, it's not quick enough to get to think that you can get that investment so quickly, especially when you've got a house and you've got deadlines, other bidders, and things like that going on. So the purpose of this, as said earlier, I think one of the main purposes of Student Cooperative Homes is to be able to facilitate this step and make it far simpler. So once a group has set up, they have identified themselves, they've realised that Student Co-op Homes exists, and they've done a bit of work in working groups and decided what they need, and then have got to the point where they're looking at incorporating, as well as helping, as well as the national body helping them through all those steps, as and when they need it, if they wish. Being able to provide the capital is probably the most crucial step, because if not, it doesn't go to anything, and you just have an incorporated body with one person that's liable, I think the secretary, for what happens financially, and to communicate to the registered body or registered governmental department about that. I think I'll stop there for that part of it. Johnny, yeah, thank you. And then hopefully after this, after all that effort you've put in, you've managed to get to the point where you've bought a house, and then you can move in. And whilst that might sound like the end, it's just the start. It's the start of operations. It's the start of actually living in there, and then that brings its own problems or challenges in regards to making sure that it continues to run, it fulfills its legal requirements, such as an annual returns, financial report, and is being a good example, being a co-op, being able to recruit new members, etc. Okay, next slide, Johnny. And so looking at the results then, once you've got that co-op, you can see, so this is actually just a bar chart of all of the halls providers in Edinburgh. So Edinburgh is a 106-bed, 1970 style halls, and they've got a leasehold agreement, so they're technically landlords, or landlord equivalent, for lack of a better word, that run 106 students accommodation. And they also run it whilst not profiting from it, investing tens of thousands of pounds and back into the property, as well as providing one of the cheapest halls in the city, without fees or deposits. And yeah, so it's just a few examples of just kind of the meetings we've gone to really, and then decided to. So this is in Manchester, for instance, outside Hollyoak House, with a plaque about cooperatives from the very early days of co-ops in the 19th century. We managed to fund a report which actually says how national body of student co-op housing is feasible, and it's given a workable model for it. We've helped commission that with the help of East of England Co-op and Acorn Co-op Supports. And yeah, so we've got Co-ops UK, one of our biggest helping bodies right now to try and push this forward. Just 2 weeks ago, we elected the board, had our first meeting, and we're still deciding a few things. So it's quite not. It's all none of the dust has settled yet. It's all still quite going on. And only about 2 months ago, the national body incorporated. We've got promises from the Co-op Bank of 6-figure numbers to put towards towards new student housing co-ops across the UK, and we've got, I think, 5 or 4 incorporated student groups ready to go, and that doesn't include Oxford. Just saying. So yeah, and yeah, we've had a good session. A really good time in talking, having discussions that we would have never otherwise had to change the community we were all living in. So very quickly, actually, I think I'm running over. Sorry, but in a nutshell, what could Oxford do? Using Birmingham, Sheffield, and Edinburgh as examples, you can go one of 3 ways. I mean, there's no examples for this one, but you can go jumbo, trying to get a student halls. You can arrange. So Edinburgh arranged it with a housing association, which was in ownership of the halls. I think Edinburgh Rock. You could probably find an equivalent one here. So then Birmingham and Sheffield, both funded by the Phone Co-op. So again, you could find another large co-op that's willing to invest in buying the freeholds, and then they can give you the leasehold of that house. 7 is a magic number. If you're aiming for a house, try and get a house that can be made to 7 bedrooms, because it's a magic number. I'll answer questions on it later if people have any questions on that. Or you could go a totally different way, which is talking to the university, trying to provide accommodation in places where maybe haven't thought of before. So we've only just tried to get our own houses or accommodation, whereas you could also look at just trying to break a deal with university for rooms in halls that it's not able to let, although I don't think it's going to be a problem in Oxford. Where you could have an agreement, some sort of tenancy management agreement, which is allowing the tenant to have more rights over what they're doing and how they're running the place. And no one wants to see this image, but yeah, it's just a bit of a caricature of really what we feel student co-op homes kind of really happens. So, and yeah, I think that's it. I will share these slides with Oxford Hub. Thanks. Yeah, cheers. And there's a video as well, which we can't show now, but thank you. Cool. Are we doing questions?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, yeah.
I don't know if you had time. Yeah, sure.
So can I ask how the terms that you got from the phone co-op would be different from a commercial mortgage you got from another financial institution?
Oh, so difference between phone co-op's agreement and what? Sorry.
Just a conventional mortgage from some other regular financial institution.
Not too sure. I'm not too sure if I know how you mean, but if you mean.
So the phone co-op bought, they've essentially provided you with a mortgage, right? They've issued you a mortgage.
No, so
Okay.
the phone co-op have, I don't know where to stand now, but no, so the phone co-op themselves have their own ownership of the mortgage, and we are just essentially just paying lease payments to them. So we're essentially just paying the rent, and they have ownership of their house and the mortgage and stuff. Yeah.
Okay, so you're paying the mortgage though, right? Effectively.
Effectively,
Because they'll just be passing it through, right?
yeah.
Okay. So I guess what I'm asking is, what's the difference between the terms of that?
Yeah. So what's the difference between terms?
The difference between the terms of what you got with that you actually have with the phone co-op than what you could have got with just a regular financial institution.
I get what you mean. Yeah, cool. So we would have got a far worse deal because we wouldn't have had any track record history of a student group, particularly handling money on this scale in any years past. So when Birmingham, for instance, Birmingham Student Housing Co-op was set up and the co-op bought it, the phone co-op have got a long track history of having good financial history, whereas the student group was only just set up pretty much out of the blue, relatively, and had no market history for any lenders to go off. So it would have been, in fact, no bank would have. I don't think any bank or even other cooperative organisations actually considered it. And that was the other, again, another difficulty with funding it as a group of students, because you haven't got that past history proof that you can make the payments and have it all working.
So why did the phone co-op? So why did the phone co-op give it to you?
Good question. Because I suppose because they had to have some level of trust, and they did put in some special terms, such as having there's a local co-op service that handles legal side of things, that we have appointed to the house to come around once a month to ensure that everything's ticking over nicely, and that any decisions that had to be made are being made, and anything that needs to be done is being done, essentially. So there was that professional contact, essentially, that was drawn into the contract to be there once a month. I think they just had confidence in the whole idea, and they looked to America. So I don't know if anyone knows about America and student housing co-ops. There are over 40,000 students in America living in student housing co-ops, and they've essentially one of the reasons that the phone co-op were confident in lending was because we essentially used a very similar model, or a UK equivalent of the North American Students for Cooperation model. It's NASCO for short.
So the phone co-op getting a commercial return?
The phone co-op getting a commercial return? Yes, but over a long period of time. Yeah, over the long term they are.
Because I'm still trying to, I don't even know.
Okay, sure.
I'm still trying to work out how the rent is so much cheaper. Because if you've got a commercial loan agreement, or if they've got a commercial loan agreement, then how is it like that much cheaper than all of the others? Because you're still paying back a mortgage, right?
Well, so we don't see that side of things. We're given a figure that we need to meet, which we then pay, and we make sure that we don't overcharge our members for it. But even with that, we do still find ourselves with surplus to be able to invest back in. I don't know if that entirely answers your question.
Either they've got a loan with very good conditions, or they've given you a loan with very good conditions.
I think so. I don't think there was good conditions about it, because there was no previous history of what a student housing co-op would, in terms of risk, what it would be like. I think there was a 60% deposit paid by the phone co-op, and then there was a 40% bank loan. Although with the student co-op housing, we're trying to get that down to as much personal or other co-op investment, and as minimal loan as possible, basically maximum own cash.
Will the phone co-op still make a return on their investment?
Yes, again over the long term, yeah, and they adjust the rent accordingly as per inflation, etc. So, yeah.
So is the difference in rent then just...
Sorry, Andy, I think there's someone else just wanted to.
No, it's not. No, I don't mind at all. No, you can have that like you said.
I
honestly don't mind. I was just going to ask if there's maybe a danger that I'm well aware I don't know very much about this at all, but you're sort of slightly reliant on philanthropy. If you're asking the phone co-op, for example, to give you a preferential loan than they would have got if they were doing kind of like typical market rates, is that kind of a sustainable model if you're effectively asking people to be generous through those kind of channels, sort of as a charity donation, if they're not getting the same return they'd be getting elsewhere? if you understand where I'm coming. Yeah.
So they should get a higher rate of return from us than they would elsewhere. So typical, I think. I mean, again, with the phone co-op and Birmingham Student Housing Co-op and Sheffield Student Housing Co-op, it's a different situation because they were more of a proof of concept that it works. And I'm not entirely sure on the specific finances of that. But in terms of, what was the second part of what you were saying?
Sort of saying that, I guess that if you're paying rent discounted compared to alternative forms of student housing, and kind of where is this extra bit coming from if it's not through the kindness of the people who are lending you money, because they're effectively foregoing the profitability that they would otherwise gain? Kind of how can you engender that to be a long-term sustainable thing where it sort of all feeds back into it, that people really want to support the project?
Because co-ops are. Did you have an answer to that? Oh, okay, that's fine. Sorry. I think So co-ops. One thing I didn't mention again, we stop for time, but there's 7 co-op principles that are recognised internationally for all co-ops. So any organisation that wants to operate under the guise of what they call the Rochdale Pioneers principles, which is just a way of operating that has that ability. So it's like they're not typical businesses basically. Because they're co-ops. That's why they'll do it, because co-ops cooperate with other co-ops, and they're willing to favour them over non-ethical investors. So.
I think also in a way it's not like, actually I think the market often adds like lots of middlemen inside, estate agents or blah blah blah, that actually add to the cost. Like actually you could say that version of the market isn't working and this is actually cutting a lot of that out.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
I think you pretty much covered what I was going to say. But yeah, it's not really philanthropy. It's not a private investor saying, out of the goodness of my heart, I'm going to invest. That's what co-ops are designed to do.
I think I was more kind of trying to get at how you would create a situation where there are enough co-ops to be able to fund it. But yeah, no, I agree.
There are many, many.
We're an architect practice that is actually a cooperative as well. So it doesn't really matter what the industry is. It's just how you form and operate, and how you work within your team then as well. It's a slight change in dynamics.
How scalable are you finding these models to be? As in, like, it sounds like all of the student housing co-ops so far just have like a single building set up for their members. And like, I feel like there's probably quite a lot of interest in basically going into a house with lower rents. But if every single purchase requires the kind of initial cost that you're talking about, like, how easy are you finding it to get new people coming in that are interested in not just like filling the spaces that you've made in the building, but actually like getting new buildings?
Awesome. So it's not just about cheap rent. That's the first thing I'd like to pick up on there. It's a way of living that you can interact with that you can't with a normal private house, just because of the way that it's structured, and you have this responsibility and shared ownership of what's going on. In terms of scalability, so currently the co-ops that have set up, they've set up again under generous other generous co-ops or people that are willing to negotiate in that way. But because they're so new, it's a bit uncommon. With student co-op housing, hopefully that will be a thing of the past, and it will be easy to set new ones up with the funding that we will get. And we're also in the very early stages of the marketing campaign for that. In terms of scalability, did you also mean about? So you also said about applications. So yeah, so differs per co-op. In Edinburgh, they get 10 applicants for every space they have in the co-op, and that's a staggering quantity of people that have interest in that.
Is that not partly because the building is already set up, as opposed to them going out and having to like set up their own company and like find funds for a new house and things? Like, I can definitely see the appeal in applying for a space in one of these houses and like taking on all the work and things that like comes from that, but actually finding the funding as you have to get a new building, especially if the resources who you've already approached have already made this massive investment. Like, how much more can you see these people giving? And also, you said like, so the student co-op housing national body thing will kind of solve a lot of these problems with the money they'll get. Where's this like kind of endowment coming from, and is it going to mean that these house prices are going to have to go up to basically pay back the companies that are like investing in this business?
So in terms of rent going up, that is dependent on the local co-op. If they don't want it to go up, then so because they've managed the house themselves, they can manage that as long as they're meeting their budget. And I don't think any of the co-ops would put it up unnecessarily, or even actually just invest in a property in the first place that would have to go up. I think we're running out of time, Johnny. But I generally just. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, Tom, if you want to go, then
I don't think I was. Sorry, I wasn't quite finished with that last question. But,
I think a lot of these questions will feed into the panel as well, because I think there's a couple of other housing co-ops that will be in the panel, and I'm sure the questions will apply. So should we feed it into the panel? Is that okay?
Cool. Yeah, awesome. Yeah, we're just going to move into the panel section. So yeah, if the panelists would like to join me up here, that would be awesome. If you want to grab a chair, hey Zad. Yes, anyone else want to? Cool. Yeah, if to start off, if everyone would just like to say their name and the organisation they're from.
I'll go first. So my name's Eleanor. I'm a second year undergrad at Hertford College, which is part of the University of Oxford, and I am one of the coordinators on the Oxford Student Co-op. We're a workers' co-op, mainly dealing in locally sourced fruits and vegetables, which we sell, and then they're all locally sourced. It's all run for students, kind of by students as well, and so obviously it's keeping costs for the minimum. And we also do a lot of fair trade and organic goods as well, which are dry goods, and it's all based through the Oxford Hub as well. So I've been invited along to speak about co-ops from a student perspective in Oxford, whether they're kind of viable in this city, and how they work within the way this university runs, in that it can be quite different, and Brooks as well. And so that's kind of that. So thank you.
Hi, I'm Miranda. I live in Kindling Housing Co-op, which is not a student co-op, but is a housing co-op. And I also helped set it up as well from the beginning. So I'm here for questions about setting up housing co-ops, I guess.
As I said, I'm Johnny from the Oxford Hub.
and I'm Chris, Birmingham Student Housing Co-op ex-member.
Cool. So one of the things I wanted to pick up on was that we mentioned earlier that cooperative housing is part of a kind of broader movement for community-led housing. And I was just wondering what your thoughts are on kind of the importance of community-led housing and why it might be a kind of better approach than kind of some of the more common kind of approaches to housing, and perhaps in your own experiences, how community-led housing has been kind of important.
Do you want to go in that way? Sorry.
Yeah, sure.
Well, I've never been in a housing cooperative, but I have experience in student housing in the city. And I mean, I completely support housing cooperatives. I think they're a great idea, and I think it's great that events like this are happening in Oxford as well to encourage that type of movement, because I think it could work really well because of the reasons we were saying before, with increasing rents, wages being so poor. The current housing market here is not sustainable, and so we need to be looking for other ways to fix that. So I'm very, very on board with the idea, and I'm excited to learn more about your experiences with it. I think running a co-op in Oxford, you have many people who are highly aware of the change they want to make, especially through organisations like the Hub. And I think there would definitely be interest in it and an audience for it. And so, yeah, and great to see what happens.
The importance of, yes. So for me, it's, yes, partly about rent. Although the place I was living in before I was living in a housing cooperative actually was cheaper rent because I had a very friendly landlord. But for me, it's more about community and ownership, but not ownership. It's more about feeling that you can make a home somewhere. So rather than having to move every 6 months and even moving from one area of the city to another and not being able to put down roots and meet your neighbours and build a community and actually make friends in your neighbourhood and feel like you can stay there for longer than 6 months at a time is really important, I feel, for a lot more than just the individuals that are in a co-op. So I think there's a lot of breakdown of community generally, and being in a space where you can actually build that and spend time with people in your community, I feel is really important societally long term. And yeah, it's something that can be really beautiful as a space to live in, and being able to dig up the garden and plant vegetables if you want to, or rip up your carpets, which was one of the first things I did when we moved into the house because they were ugly. It's really liberating as an experience, and in a city where, as an adult in my 30s, it's very unlikely that I would be able to buy a house if I wanted to. It seems like, for me, a much better option than anything else I could think of anyway.
Cool. Chris?
Yeah, making a house a home. Yeah, definitely. And the gardening stuff, yeah. Yeah, for me, it's just about empowering people to especially students to have an education that isn't to do with just their degree, but it's something that they can learn to take away for life. Even if they live in a rented accommodation afterwards, they're well better equipped to deal with chasing up their landlord about something, or if you wanted to, I think also just having links with the cooperative movement is pretty helpful, just because there are just so many very positive and very friendly cooperatives that want to help out.
Awesome, cool. Something else I wanted to explore was the fact that housing co-ops exist in Oxford already, but there isn't an existing student housing co-op. So I was wondering if you had any thoughts on why housing co-ops might be a good solution for students specifically, and if there are any problems that students face currently that you think they could be kind of overcome with the help of kind of cooperative housing.
Yeah, I mean, I could say a bit about what I think is going on, if that helps. I mean, I actually haven't been a student in Oxford, but I hear lots of stories from people about how awful their accommodation is if they're not in halls, and how high the fees are and the deposits are, especially if you're a foreign student. Friends of mine who had to pay 6 months in advance and their deposits to rent privately is completely extraordinary. And something about housing co-ops is that it can help with that, but it also, I think, is really valuable in terms of people living together and learning how to live with people, how to communicate, how to and also learning your rights as well. And I think that could be a really important thing for more students. If more students knew their rights in housing and then went back into the private rental sector, I think things would change quite drastically over a shorter period of time. Yeah, I'm not sure if I answered the question there, but yes.
I think a lot of what you said, obviously being a student in this city, I do currently live in halls because my college offers accommodation with the full 3 years, but that's certainly not the case for colleges at Oxford, and definitely at Brookes. I think from your second year onwards you have to live out. I was just told earlier. So and I mean that's an extortionate number of people who need housing, and especially when you're moving away from home, you don't know if like what the acceptable fees are. You don't know where to start really, and it's so easy. You're in a very vulnerable position, and that's why I think the ethos of a cooperative movement as well is something which is really great to share with people and prevent that from happening. Yeah, does that sound good?
Add something to that as well. So there is also a situation where in certain areas of the city, and at least this is a conversation I've heard, I don't have the stats or anything in my brain, there are probably other people in this area that have more information on this, but from what I can sense, that I grew up in Oxford, and there are areas of the city where once students move into those areas, the prices go up because the landlords see that they can do that. And then that means that the prices go up for everybody else in the city as well. So something about housing cooperatives that could add to levelling that back out again. There are certain areas that local people have been priced out of because students have moved into those areas. And like, you know, I love students, I love people, but you know, it's also a thing about, you know, changing the whole like demographic of an area and trying to re-level that, I think is important as well.
I thought of this before and then forgot to say it while I was speaking, and then it came back to me. I think what you were saying before as well about making roots somewhere and making a house a home is also something, like you were saying, when you're moving across the city, and definitely in my own experience, you feel very unsettled, especially when you're meeting new people. You start on a complete blank slate and you have to do that every year or every time. And just from a mental health perspective, I think it's worth noting that having a group of people who you have so much in common with and you're working on a building together, that can bring people together so much. If you're decorating, if you're ripping up carpets or working in the garden together, I think that's something, I think especially in Oxford, in this city, where you like mental health rates are appalling and it's just getting worse. I think that could be a great way to combine everything together. I know, Johnny, you're very passionate about that too, so yeah.
Cool. Thank you. Chris, do you have
Do you have time?
so
I don't mind moving on if you. Yeah, sounds fine.
Okay. That's
It's cool.
Okay. Cool. Yeah. So another thing I wanted to talk about was how do you think that practically, in practical terms, students in Oxford can actually start to build housing co-ops, and how can we sort of get the word out about this as a possible solution to some of the problems that students are facing in terms of housing, and yeah, how can students go about doing that if people maybe here today are interested in kind of exploring that? Well, yeah, cool. Should we go this way?
Do you want to start?
Okay.
Yeah, sure. So, sorry, Johnny, do you mind just reiterating the question? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. What, in practical terms, how can students go about kind of getting the word out if there are people here?
Oh, wow. Yeah. So one thing you could do, specifically for student housing co-ops. So I will share the slides, including the last slide does have a link to a video on it. If you go to Co-ops UK's Facebook page, you'll find it on there as well. So we got there's two videos out there. That's the sort of Co-ops UK one is probably like quite effective way of trying to rally some students behind something and giving them an insight to what a couple of the student housing co-ops look like already. That would be my one thing to say. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, Katie.
So how did you? So you're interested in a housing co-op, but how did you get your group of friends together then?
I wasn't around at the very beginning for Birmingham, but I heard it started in the Students' Union, and they one of the students was inspired. They went on a trip and they told their friends about it. They went to America actually. They did a cycling tour of some of the student housing co-ops in America. They came back wondering why isn't this happening in the UK. Inspired all the friends, which are in different groups already that are already established in societies on campus, and worked with many people that, regardless of what society they were from, they wanted to come and like live in this place. And so then they went to I think they went to a conference called Co-op Congress, and they just networked really. So a bit of networking with people that are that were ready to take them up on the challenge. Yeah, that's kind of the journey that happened in Birmingham, as far as I remember.
Would the new organisation setting up be able to provide finance now? Or is it still in the student co-op homes? Would that not be now where people could approach the students?
Yes, yeah, of course. That is the other, yeah. So and also student co-op housing, you can definitely approach. There is a page on the Co-ops UK website. Again, it's in the with the video.
But it's ready to give money yet, or it's in the process?
It's setting. So it's acquiring the funds. So we're talking with the Co-op Bank right now, and we've already approached some other large regional co-ops that have said that they will provide funding, and yeah, so it's just about continuing that conversation and getting to the point where they, we've got more down the line basically with the groups that are there. But there are two groups that are definitely ready to go right now, and they're literally just waiting funding. So we're just continuing discussions with who we've gotten inside with, and this is also with help of Co-ops UK, who have been very generous in helping us with contacting and arranging this with the industry, with the cooperative movement.
Yeah. So is the long-term aim for the student housing cooperatives to actually own their buildings outright? And if so, is that actually in the agreements that you've signed with these other large co-ops? Because if they're recouping their costs over a very large period, what happens at the end of that period? Are they actually still going to own the house and still be just then making profit, or does the ownership then transfer?
Yeah, I think it's the purpose of every housing co-op to want to outright buy their home outright eventually. Okay, most of the time. Sorry, my mind's gone blank. So with the agreement with being financed from these larger co-ops, there will be a time when their investment comes to an end. They'll get a return on that, which will be equivalent, if not better, than putting it in a savings account. And most of the time, unless they want to do it not for getting money back, which is quite not too uncommon in co-ops as well.
So on the question of like the practical kind of how can I start in Oxford?
So one thing, there are two housing co-ops in Oxford, and most of us are usually quite happy to have a chat about setting up housing co-ops. With the way that we did it as well was we got together a group of friends and people, extended network of friends, just sent out the message. Andy in the doorway sent out a message to everybody he knew, and got together a group of probably about 30 to 40 people, who then dwindled down to the people who had that same kind of a bowl, sat in the same kind of bowl, and then we built a vision together and then went forward through the steps. But I think that the biggest thing is getting together a group of people who are really willing to put in the work to set it up, because it does take quite a lot of people hours doing it. So it's usually a lot of fun. For us, it involved a lot of trips to the pub, a lot of pizza, a lot of chips, also a lot of work. And I don't know, I find it quite exciting from a slightly geeky perspective of like learning all the bits and pieces that you need to learn and figuring it all out together. And I would say that some of the people I live with and some of the people who we like set up together with are still good friends, and that's really lovely as well. And yeah, I think it's definitely a long process, or it can be a long process. I think it's really useful to draw on co-ops who already exists knowledge, and I think for us as Kindling, one of the things that we really do want to do is support other co-ops in setting up while the information is fresh in our brains, because it's like quite a lot of information, and it'd be really nice to just like hand that over as soon as possible to whoever wants it. Because it is a lot of information, and if you can access that from people who've already done the work, then it's a lot easier and a lot quicker. So yeah, I would recommend if anybody does want to set up a housing co-op, then speak to current housing co-ops about how they did it, and yeah, find friends.
Obviously, not part of a housing co-op, but I think I can echo completely what you say on work hours as well. Kind of doing, even just on this small scale where we're sourcing food, it can take up so much of your time, and it kind of goes without you realizing it. So it does have to be something that you're passionate about, and the people you're working with, you can rely on them, and you know. So yeah, sometimes so for example, recently our supplier doesn't have any fruit bags. So that was one of our most popular products, but we can't sell them for this term because of just the harvest locally kind of didn't work out. And our supplier said, it's a farmer near 10 miles away. And they said, we could provide you with like some European fruit. So it's grown there. And so then we had a discussion, like, is this something ethically we feel is right? Would we be letting our customers down? How can we, is this something we want to do? And we decided ultimately no, but that shows that those types of questions that you never would have thought of, and I'm sure you get the same thing in housing co-ops as well, just issues that come out of nowhere, and take up time to think about. I see the look on your face, like, yeah. And that's definitely something in a student context. And the other thing I'll say is the transference of information as well. So to give you an idea, I'm a coordinator now, but I mean, we're only really in this role for a year at a time, which means kind of just as soon as you've learned how to do everything, you leave and someone else is taking over, and that can be a bit of a struggle in finding your feet. So I'd say that I reckon we keep quite a good online resource document where people fill out just a list of all necessary passwords and websites and finance information or publicity stuff, and I mean even stuff like working with the local council in terms of food hygiene, which took one of our members quite like by surprise when that was something we kind of hadn't properly thought about before. And so yeah, I'll stop rambling on as I'm not sure of time, but that's my input.
Does anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask? Yeah, sure.
It'd probably be to Chris. So in regards to the student housing co-op, obviously you get to a point. You need us for the stream, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So the question is in regards to the student housing co-ops. Obviously, you get to a point where you're, as a student co-op, you own the property. Obviously, being a student is 3 to 4 years, so you're not students anymore. What happens then?
So, yeah, I think on average, members in Birmingham Student Housing Co-op live there for 2 years, so it's even quicker than that. And just to confirm your question, sorry, do you mind just again just saying?
So eventually, at some point, the co-op's going to own the property for students.
Oh, okay.
But being a student has only a short period of time. What happens with those people living there?
Sure. Okay. So you mean over, so originally there'll be the mortgage to pay, but then eventually over 20 or however long, 20 years or however long, there won't be anything to pay anymore. So then you're saying what would happen when the students then don't have to pay the mortgage? Yeah, we've discussed a few things to do. Very tempting options, but then we looked at then we one of the key things really is again to reinvest that back into the movement again, to try and keep more of these houses popping up because they are so high in demand, and that can only be done if the group, for instance Student Co-op Homes, collectively puts that money towards newer co-ops rather than just letting it just accruing then funds for themselves, which doesn't make sense. But
like the co-op that you mentioned earlier, they had a fund.
yes, like a social development fund. Yeah, so there's
a clause that says once you're no longer a student, you must leave.
yes, with a bit of I think
Nicely.
nicely, not straight away, but yeah, within a certain amount of time. Yeah. Other things that happen as well. So you could definitely reduce the rent, but you could also then make sure that you're making a contribution to the national pot. There's these discussions actually are still ongoing. I might add, but it will almost certainly be around the route of contributing, making sure that they're still paying less than, or a fair figure for the rent, which is most likely cheaper than the local average, and helping other co-ops to prosper by helping others pay off their mortgage.
Kindling Housing Co-operative is a fully mutual co-op, which means that none of the members will personally profit from the house once. So if I decided to live there for the next 40 years, I wouldn't then get a chunk of the house or anything like that. And another one example that's quite lovely in Oxford is that there is another housing co-op in Oxford called Dragonfly. They are nearing the point where they would have paid off everything, and they have taken out a loan for us to support Kindling setting up. So, and they're paying the interest on that loan. So, as a part of mutual solidarity with the co-op movement in Oxford. So that's one way in which co-ops can support other co-ops. And there are other co-ops around the country who have paid off their mortgages, who then will be like, cool, well, we can lend this co-op £50,000, or we can, support in this way, or support through coming and visiting you and helping you set up a new co-op. I think that's a real massive element of the co-op movement, is that it's about supporting other co-ops. So it's not just about being like, this is our co-op and we will prosper. It's about being like, cool, how are we going to support other co-ops in the future and now, and how does that happen, and how can we do that best? Is that through money? Is that through going and visiting and helping people sort out their financial model, or doing a workshop on community living, or bulk ordering food, or like whatever it happens to be? It's like, how do we all support each other in that movement, in that way of doing things, and figuring out new ways of doing things as well. I think that's important.
I think you've covered it all.
Cool. Any other questions, Tom? I think you had one from a little while ago.
With apologies to the rest of the panel, I'd just like to ask a small technical question to Chris. You mentioned a report done in collaboration with Students for Cooperation in the East of England Co-op. Is that publicly accessible, and if so, how?
I don't think it's online as far as I'm aware. But if you were, so one place you could check, I haven't actually checked myself. I've only had a printed copy for the entire time I've read it. There is at least a news article on if you go to www.students.coop. It might actually be online. If not, then it will be at some point soon. But it's a 70-page spread looking at like example business models as well as financial projections and quite a lot of really technical stuff. Very handy for anyone that's interested in setting up a student housing co-op.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Now I feel bad about before. I just wanted to ask Miranda how you guys raised the funding and what kind of people you approached. And then how you're making sure that debt isn't transferred on to you, so it's in the legal body, and because that bit's quite interesting.
The money. So some of the money came from people. Our deal was we took investments from individuals with a minimum of £5,000 for a minimum of 5 years, up to 3% interest, and that's what works within the model. The number of £5,000 was purely because we felt that any smaller amount would suddenly become quite finicky and difficult to manage. And it was quite a good sum to just start with. And so exact figure that we borrowed from people was about £250,000 from individuals that we knew in Oxford. There is money. And we borrowed the rest from Triodos Bank. So that the house was £550,000, and there was other costs on top of that we had to pay, like stamp duty and things like that. So I think in total we borrowed £630,000. And yeah, and some people said, cool, you can have £5,000 for 5 years and I don't want any interest because I believe in what you're doing. Other people said I would like, 1% above base rate, Bank of England base rate, up to 3%. It's very varied. And some people just said, yes, I would like to give you £5,000 for 5 years and I want 3% interest. So, it varied quite a lot, and that's how I got the money. And it was quite an interesting process of having to line it all up in quite a short amount of time in the end, because we had to get pledges from individuals to be able to prove to the bank that we could come up with the rest of the money. And then once the bank agreed to give us the money, then we had to get the pledges into real money. So it was all quite a quick lineup.
Other questions?
Doesn't that mean you've got a big balloon payment to make in 5 years' time?
Yes. So we're all paying rent. And the money is accumulating again. We have taken out, we will be remortgaging at some point. That is in our business plan. And we will have to refinance as well. I think there is a general feeling that co-ops in debt is a good thing. If you have to work for the kind of the co-op, it's quite good because it means that you're not just being too relaxed about it, and you're actually working for what you're living in as well. On one level, there's other arguments for it as well that have gone out of my brain. But it's if you're borrowing money from other co-ops as well, then it's keeping that in the movement, and you're sort of just cycling the money as well. And it doesn't feel like too daunting either. It's like, sort of, some people might then want to just reinvest the money. Like 5 years actually goes quite a lot quicker than most people think it does. Some people might not want to, but that's an offer we can give to people. Like, do you want your money back now, or do you want to reinvest it for another 5 years? Doesn't feel too stressful.
Cool. How are we doing for time? Where are we at? Okay, cool. Can we have another question? Thanks, Charlie.
So I just wanted to add a point to the finance question, the money that's available. For certain places in the country with high incidence of second home ownership and lots of affordability issues, like Oxford, there's never been more money available for co-ops, since in the last 30 to 40 years. With the Community Housing Fund that was released by the government at the end of 2016, Oxfordshire got just over £500,000. That has gone in various different ways because it went straight to local authorities, but year 2 is going to go directly to community enterprises through hub organisations. And there's a hub being set up by the organisations that are working on this event tonight, the Land Trust, Community Foundation, and Community First, which is a community development organisation. So later in this year, there could be quite a lot of money for setting up and assisting these kind of entities. So sort of stay posted, get on our Facebook pages and sign up.
Cheers. Any other questions, Tom?
We're plugging things. Can I just very, very briefly? You might have heard recently that Central University Accommodation are going to increase their rent by 5.8% next year. The SU is holding an open meeting with the Pro-Vice Chancellor of Planning and Resources, David Prout, tomorrow at 1 in the SU. If you are a student or if you know students and you would like to come to that, then please do.
Cool. Yeah, that sounds really cool. Awesome. Is that
so if someone is a student at Oxford and would want to be in some sort of housing co-op structure, are the current housing co-ops open to new members, or is the only option basically starting our own one?
We're currently full. Hopefully you will stay that way for some time now. The other housing co-op in Oxford to the best of my knowledge, will be looking for new members in the next couple of months. But I wouldn't put that in writing because I'm not them. So yeah, but yeah, it's always good to keep an eye out, and they usually put stuff out on social media. Dragonfly. So yeah, they usually try and spread it as far as they possibly can, about the information about it. And yeah, if you want to set up a housing cooperative, like, yeah, find a group of people that wants to do it. Let's do it.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah, question at the back.
I definitely back what you're saying. Like, living in a co-op will be great, but given how difficult it seems to be to actually set up for like a large number of people, and especially in Oxford, just how unbelievably expensive housing is, and it's even more difficult for us to actually outbid these institutions that are here who just have ridiculous sums of money. Like down in Cowley, a load of the new estates have just been bought up by colleges to like build student housing. Like I don't know, have you had any interactions with like renters unions which are being set up slowly, and like, because action does kind of need to be taken to bring these rents down, but I don't know.
I mean, I don't know. I think that there is possibly like possibility as well. I think that, I don't know. I would say talk to colleges. I would say talk to the people in charge of these things. I would say bring it into their vision of seeing things. I think there are definitely models where the universities could see themselves benefiting from it long term. I think that, you know, it's not just about being like, this is how a co-op works. It's about thinking outside the box and getting those institutions to back it as well. Like, why aren't colleges backing setting up housing co-ops for students? Like, why aren't they putting the money down? Like, massive profit, yeah, but they could make that profit over a longer period of time as well with helping set up housing co-ops, I think. Not maybe as instantly, but the university does think long term. They're a very, 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 very old thing. And they do think long term. Like, they definitely think long term. Like, they definitely plant trees to fix their beams in 200 years' time. Like, they really do think long term. And, like, I think more than councils, they might be up for thinking about it. And that's in a positive thingy.
Yeah.
Do you mind if I just also add to that question? Yeah, so this is something that's been taken up. So Glasgow Student Housing Co-op, they haven't got a house, but they've been incorporated. They've been approached, and they've actually been in talks with, I don't want to say the name of the university because I get it wrong, but a university in Glasgow about doing just like coming to some arrangement of managing the halls differently, and then also with that potentially financial changes to it, because they do have more supply than they do demand. So I think Miranda's right with talking, like, thinking outside the box and doing things that haven't been done before. I didn't get much time to talk about what potential options that were in the presentation, but or prepare more for that question. But it's not, it is hard. It's definitely like it's not an easy thing to do, but no startup is, because it's effectively a startup. But it's made much easier having student co-op housing just incorporated the other month, and for us to be wanting to help groups, like if there's a group in Oxford here, Brighton, we're also helping out with a group there right now to start going somewhere. It's not impossible, and it's very rewarding once it happens.
Do you have any thoughts on that, Eleanor?
The only thing I can really add on it is I think I really echo what they said with colleges having a long-term plan. I think it's worth just bearing in mind how many people you can approach in the area as well, because it's even like the SU who are kind of present, little nod, and like different colleges and then the university as a whole. There are loads of bodies involved, and I think there's a lot of information out there as well. I think that's
I just wanted wanted to say that it's also not just a financial benefit. I think we've spoken a lot about finances, but I think certainly for the tenants or the members, but also the institutions like the universities that could get involved. Actually, universities are a place for innovation and new thinking, and I suppose moving forwards. So why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't they do something that has all these benefits and moves them forwards and kind of put something to their face publicly as well that they can communicate with their community? And also somewhere like Oxford, that's, you know, it's a huge place. They get around, so they'll want to tell people about it.
Cool. Okay, Tom.
Miranda, can I ask a question about like when Kindling started up, but once it was incorporated and when it was looking for a house, what were you looking for? What were the things that you had to get?
Oh, we had such a big list. It ended up with being quite a big list. It was a lot of things around being a home. So we had a specific requirement for sizes of rooms so that they would be proper sized bedrooms. I think it was 3 meters by 3 meters for bedrooms, or as near to that as possible. Good light. We had to have a big enough communal space so that we felt we could actually spend time together. The amount of properties we viewed that had 6 bedrooms, but the 6th bedroom was the living room. Yeah, so that had been converted into a bedroom. So there was actually no communal space. In fact, one of our members lived in a house before us where that was the case, and she was paying, I think, almost double the rent that she's paying now. For a house with no communal space. We had to have a garden of some sort, and quite a lot of other things, and it had to work financially within the financial model. So yeah, X amount of money per bedroom. I can't remember the amount, but yeah, it had to kind of work well within that model. Yeah, and it just made sense when we found it as well. So that's good.
How long it took? Yeah, like roughly how many properties were you looking for? Like how long?
How long? So we started looking in, like actually looking for a house in the January, and we moved in September, which I think is pretty fast as a turnaround. And before that, we'd been working on the project for a year and a half. Yeah. I think it's about 2 and a bit years between first meeting and buying a house.
Awesome. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, just to add to that, criteria that I've seen some of the groups in student co-op homes looking for is maybe, if it's not there already, a potential for that. So they're trying. So we're trying to get to the magic 7 number, which is a good number because there's enough people for it to share the workload as well as keep harmony in a house easier, it turns out. And yeah, so if that hasn't got those things already, or some of the things, looking at potential ways to do that. If there's like some random study that isn't used for anything else, converting that to a bedroom maybe, or things like that.
Question? Okay, cool. Okay. Yeah. Well, yeah. That's. I think that covers everything. So yeah, it was really interesting to explore these issues with everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Special thanks to our panel. If we could have a round of applause, that'd be awesome. And yeah, just on a final note, just wanted to do a little plug. So this event has been co-organised by me, and I'm from the Oxford Hub. If anyone here is a student and would like to get involved in social action, volunteering, we help people set up social enterprises. We help people develop skills if they're interested in going to social impact careers. So all of that kind of stuff, if you're interested. I've got a mailing list. If you write down your email, we will sign you up to a mailing list, and you can hear about all the opportunities that we're offering. And yeah, otherwise, we've got some biscuits and some water. So if anyone wants to chat about any of these issues, or just hang around for a bit, that'd be really cool. And yeah, thanks for coming, basically. Cool, thank you.